What I'd like to do now is to introduce Shaykh Rami Nsour, who is no stranger to ACA and our ACA community. MashaAllah, he has contributed a lot to our community. He's visited, regularly visiting from the Bay Area to our community. MashaAllah, as all of you know, he's one of the co-founders of Tayba Institute, which is doing incredible educational work within the US prison system. MashaAllah, there are so many full-fledged ulama that have been produced through this program. And he helped redesign and redevelop our curriculum, our Islamic Studies and Sacred Sciences curriculum at ACA as well. So without further ado, inshallah, I'll pass it over to Shaykh Rami. What we're going to do with our three speakers tonight is we're going to split some of the themes of Ramadan, which are mercy, forgiveness, and liberation or emancipation from the hellfire. So Shaykh Rami, inshallah, will begin with the theme of forgiveness in this blessed month of Ramadan. Tafadhal, Shaykh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to everyone there, and thank you for having me. It's been a while since I visited the community, but mashallah, the ACA community at large, and I say community, not just the school, because it is a community. They have a masjid on campus. They have Taraweeh. Normally there would be Taraweeh there. And I've been blessed to pray Taraweeh behind Hafiz Yasser and some of his students. In fact, just a few days ago, I was speaking with Dr. Mi'raj, who is the author of Revelation, a book that we've been able to send into the prison. I'm sure everybody and I'm not getting paid for this plug, but he wrote this book on Sirah. I highly recommend it. And he was also teaching at ACA, which is one of the points of the 2020 vision, was to bring in experts from many different fields. And so he taught, and I got a chance to speak with him there. And we were speaking a few days ago, and he shared with me a video, and I heard the Quran reciter. I said, wow, that sounds like Hafiz Yasser. And I asked about him, and then I found some of his videos online. It's Hafiz Hassan, who's one of the graduates of the Hifz program there at ACA. And maybe you can link his YouTube page. He has amazing qira'ah, and he was able to memorize the Quran and learn the qira'at al-ashar there at ACA. So there is amazing scholarship happening right there at ACA, and I would encourage everybody to listen. I've been listening this last week to his qira'ah specifically, and I reached out to Hafiz Yasser. I said, when I heard this, it was as if I was listening to you, and then I found out it was one of your students. And that reminds us of the nasab that occurs, the connection, the spiritual lineage that occurs in teaching. I also want to share a little bit about my connection with the ACA community. In 2017, Brother Umair, Hafiz Yasser reached out to me, and as part of their surveying and getting advice from people across the US, and as I was looking at names on some of the maps, I mean, they really reached out to some of the core institutions in the US. There, I don't know if you noticed, but it was Al Ghazali School, which my wife, Dr. Rania, who's going to be speaking as well, she went to that school, and a number of very prominent figures here in the US went to that school, like Sheikh Yasser Fahmy, his sister Dalia Fahmy, who are doing amazing things here in the US, and they came out of that school. So for ACA to reach out to that school and other schools as well, in Houston, I think, I saw Dayton there, Chicago, and a number of Bay Area names. So they're really extracting a lot of the best in terms of educational practices and advice and best guidelines. There was a lot of other things too that was part that I benefited directly when they mentioned about instructional coaching, and they brought in a professional instructional coach, a person who trains the trainers of teachers for best teaching. So I personally benefited from that. And it was really my time that I was coming on a monthly basis. And I used to joke, I said, I commute by airplane, because I would drive to SFO, fly to ACA, spend the day, maybe the night, but sometimes I was flying in the morning and flying back. So I learned how to commute by airplane by going to ACA, but it was a very enriching experience for me. And I still have a connection to ACA, and I look forward to helping ACA grow, because I really feel strongly that ACA, with this model of the 2020, as they expand it, now here we are in 2020, but as we build on what was done during these last 3 years, ACA is really, I firmly believe that it will be a model for schools, Islamic schools across the US. So your investment in ACA is not only a sadaqah jariyah for this school and this community, but it also has far-reaching capabilities. So I want to begin with, I know the first subject or the theme of the first 10 days of Ramadan is Rahmah. and I was asked to speak on that, but my wife and I, Dr. Rania, we asked to be able to switch because I have a very a personal journey about understanding forgiveness, maghfirah, and that I want to share with you. And this, it's kind of my personal way of really coming to, I won't say a deep understanding of forgiveness, but a deeper understanding that what I had, say 20 years ago, when I first started seriously studying this deen, or 22 now in 1998. But it began really in a text that is studied in West Africa. It's called the Prohibitions of the Tongue. And it discusses the concept of forgiveness. Because, you know, when we look right now during this month of Ramadan or throughout the rest of the year, when we're turning to Allah for forgiveness, yes, He can give forgiveness to us without any conditions. He'll forgive for whatever He pleases to forgive. But if we want to access another level of forgiveness, well, then we have to internalize that characteristic of forgiveness and forgive other people. We have to forgive other people if we want the forgiveness to ourselves. And I often tell myself, and I remind others, that how can we turn to Allah and forget and ask forgiveness for ourselves for the sins that we've done, and we're asking forgiveness from Him, but we're not forgiving other people. So as I was reading this book, there was a section about Imam al-Qurtubi discusses the ayah, وَأَن تَعْفُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ, that if you forgive, it's better for you. And he says this is not absolute. It's not absolute that you have to forgive everybody. He said the forgiveness that we give to other people is for the people who are remorseful, for the people who was just a one-off situation. But if a person is doing something on a very regular basis and we always forgive them, well, then maybe we're aiding and abetting them. We're enabling them in that behavior. So he said sometimes it's good to demand your right, and sometimes it's also good to forgive depending on the situation. And there was another story that was mentioned in there, and it's a hadith that's sometimes especially when I mention this hadith to children, they like the name that's mentioned in the hadith. And it's narrated on the authority of Anas radiallahu anhu that the Messenger of Allah, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, قال أَيَعْجِزُ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَكُونَ كَأَبِي ضُمْضُمْ. Can any of you be like, or are you not able to be like Abu Dumdum? And the Sahaba said, who is Abu Dumdum? Or in one narration, Abu Damdam. And the kids, they love when they hear Abu Dumdum. He was a man in Jahiliyyah, and the Prophet ﷺ said, when he would go out every morning, he would say, Allahumma inni qad wahabtu nafsi wa irdi laka. Oh Allah, I have given as a gift myself and my dignity. Meaning, anybody that has something that I have something against, if they've harmed me, if they've hurt me, if they've said something about me, I'm forgiving that, Ya Allah. And so the Prophet ﷺ was saying, you know, in another hadith, it says he would give as his sadaqah, give as his charity, forgiving other people. So I used to think that this charity was that the other person gets forgiven so that they don't have to have a responsibility on the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah. So the benefit is to them. And that was my understanding. And then a number of years ago on a flight, I was actually taking, and again, I'm not getting money from Southwest, although they're one of the only airlines that are flying right now. But there was an article in there, it's called The Heart of Darkness, and it's about a man in Southern California whose son was a pizza delivery man, and when he went to somebody's house, he was actually murdered by the people there. His son's name was Khamisa. He was his only son. He was a teenager. He helped a lot of things. And the father went into the woods on a camping trip that weekend because it was so overwhelming, you could just imagine. And he said he did not come down from the mountain until he had forgiven the killer of his son. And then there was a story, it goes on, and I encourage you to look it up. Now he has a foundation where the father of the young man who was murdered and the grandfather of the murderer, and this was his only grandson, got together and they started this foundation in memory of Khamisa, to teach forgiveness and alternative to violence. And they do a lot of work, especially in the San Diego area. But when I read his story, I said, wow, now I realize Abu Dumdum. If this man can forgive, and he said he had to forgive that other person for his own benefit so that he could go on in life. So that began me, allowing me to understand that forgiveness is not just for the other person, it's also for yourself. Then I read another book, and I encourage you as well to read this book. It was very interesting. It's by Dr. Dean Ornish. It's called Reversing Heart Disease. And in it, he actually has a evidence-based and they did this through clinical trials, method to reverse heart disease without medication and without surgery. And he said it's based on 3 principles. One is meditation, one is diet, and the other is exercise. Without going into all of the details, the one on meditation, he said part of it is forgiving others. And he said, why? He said, because every time you think of that instance where you were hurt, somebody said something about you, so you were harmed, every time you replay that story in your mind, your body releases a lower level of cortisol, stress hormones, that in the same way that it released it at the initial time. And he said that taxes your body. So you want to leave that, get rid of that so that you can take it easy on your heart. So this gave me more introspection into the concept of forgiveness, that it's not only a benefit to the others, there's also a physiological benefit to yourself. Then a couple of months ago, I was talking about forgiveness and mentioning this concept of that was mentioned by Imam al-Qurtubi. And so one of the men in the halaqah over here in our community in the Bay Area, he mentioned, he said, I hear a lot about forgiveness being discussed from the Muslim, in the khutbahs, and always a reminder to forgive others. He said, but I want to see more of an articulated and a detailed understanding of forgiveness. And then he shared with me a book called Forgive for Good. And I would highly encourage you. It's an amazing book. The author, Dr. Luskin, has a center on forgiveness at Stanford University where he studies it. So it's not just like self-help guru, anecdotal type things. It's actually a lab in Stanford University where they're studying forgiveness, and they look at a lot of people who have gone through very terrible situations in Northern Ireland, in other parts of the US where there was atrocities committed against people, and what happened to those who forgave others and what happened to those who didn't. And so he has there, he says 9 steps of forgiveness, and this is coming out of research. I can't go through them all. I want to respect the time. I only have about 2 more minutes, but he gives 9 steps for how to forgive. And I feel, as going through them, I really think that these line up with our Islamic tradition. It's not that something from outside of our tradition where, we're leaving Islam. It's just giving us a modern articulation of what we can find in our tradition. And I'll just mention 1 out of the 9, which is, this was 1. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciling with the person who upset you or that you condone the action. And this was very interesting to me because in our tradition, we have the concept of forgiveness, afu or maghfirah, but there's also sulh, which is reconciliation. And so he's saying here, he says, you don't have to reconcile, which sometimes we think that, to forgive, I actually have to meet the person and reconcile and so forth. He's saying, no, they're 2 separate things. Forgiveness is more for yourself. Reconciliation is with the other person. And he mentions another very, very interesting idea. He said, most of the time that we harbor these feelings against other people, we've created this story. So there was the incident that occurred, and then we have that memory, but then we created a story, and the story kind of balloons, and then we replay it ourselves over and over and over again. And so what's really hurting us is the story, not the original incident. And so he says, you'll be doing yourself a big favor just by forgiving the person, but you have to go through it. You have to articulate what happened to you, why it was bad. And sometimes this needs to be done with a professional. So it might have to go, if it's a deep hurt, to go through with a counselor or a therapist or so forth. So in respect of the time, I just want to suggest to expand an understanding of forgiveness in some of the modern literature and modern research, to read more about the Khamisa Foundation, also to look into Dr. Dean Ornish's book on reversing heart disease, and then most importantly, the Forgive for Good. They also have a website where they go through all of this. But since this is a month of forgiveness, we're not only seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us, we also want to be able to forgive other people. And this would be a good time to really look at all of those grievances that we're holding, those stories that we have, and start working for them and begin forgiving them and let it go. And for lack of a deep esoteric historical wisdom that I can mention, in the famous Disney song, Let It Go, that could be a something that reminds ourselves that sometimes we do have to let it go, and it's for the other person's benefit in this life and the akhirah, but it's also for our benefit. Thank you very much again for listening, and thank you to ACA for inviting me. And I would encourage everyone who is able to donate, even if it's a small amount, but if you can give to ACA as much as you can to help expand the program. Many people are benefiting beyond just the walls of the ACA school. So Jazakumullah khair, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and bless your families and keep you safe during this month.